Greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's VentureBeat Webinar on how 3D geolocation is about to transform gaming, service delivery, and more. Brought to you by NextNav. My name is Dave Clark. I'll be your host for this VB Live event. Now, before we get started, just a few quick notes. I want you to know that this will be an interactive webinar today, so don't be shy. We want to hear from you. If you have any questions for our speakers, we invite you to type them at any time under the Ask a Question tab on your screen. So get all of those questions in. And also, if your question happens to be specific to one particular person, please be sure to indicate that person's name in your question. That'll be very, very helpful. You'll also notice on your screen that there is an attachments tab. We have a couple of links for you there that we would like you to take a look at your convenience. And finally, there's also a rating system associated with this webinar. You can provide us with feedback at any time. You'll find that under the Rate This tab. You can rate this webinar on a 5-star scale, and you can also send us comments. We encourage you to do that at any time and as often as you like today. All right, well, let's get started with today's discussion on how 3D geolocation is about to transform gaming, service delivery, and more. And let's kick things off by meeting today's speakers. Timothy West is VP of Augmented, Virtual, and Mixed Reality Tools at Unity Technologies. Sarah Burslem is Head of Business Development, EMEA, at Niantic. Dan Haidt is VP and GM of Data Partnerships at NextNav, and Dean Takahashi is lead writer at GamesBeat. Let's start things off with Timothy. Timothy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Sure, yeah. I'm Timothy West. I lead a team that spans a wide swath of XR. And I'm sorry if you're hearing noises in the background. My dogs have decided to play right in front of my desk. So my team spans the gamut from building out the tooling that is needed for all these new crazy devices with massive amounts of sensor information that we need to be able to get into the editor and then back out at runtime. And then also works with our partners very closely to integrate their technology, all of the great emerging work that they're doing, and make sure that the devices run as smoothly as possible. So that's what we're working on.
Great. Thank you so much, Timothy. Next up is Sarah. Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great, thank you. Nice to be here and chat with you all. I'm in charge of business development and partnerships for the EMEA region. So that spans from new projects, new IP projects, to thinking about commercial partnerships for our new Lightship project, to sort of all aspects of what we're doing at Niantic. So great to chat with you all.
Thanks, Sarah. Dan, you're next. Introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Dan Haidt. I lead data partnerships at NextNav, really focused on enhancing location data with the third dimension, the Z-axis, and bringing that to market, working with location analytics, data providers, as well as platforms like Unity, and helping to bring this new capability to market to developers.
Thanks, Dan. And finally, Dean, who will be serving as today's moderator. What can you tell us about yourself, Dean?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. I've been writing about games for about 25 years and for about tech for longer than that. And I am also in charge of getting all our speakers for the GamesBeat Summit events.
Terrific. And Dean, you're going to be leading us through today's discussion as our moderator, like I mentioned, and we're going to get started now. So I'm going to turn things over to you now. Dean, take it away.
All right, thank you, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. For Dan, why don't we start with telling us about the NextNav and the technology, and then what its relevance is for some general applications here.
Yeah, no, thanks. Absolutely, Dean. So NextNav, we're essentially a location infrastructure service company that's trying to solve the challenges of GPS. GPS was not built to be tasked with a lot of the solutions that are, being underlaid with it today. And the first and foremost that we're trying to solve for right now is the altitude dimension, the Z-axis. So if you think about traditional location-based services, we're all used to them using, things like Google Maps and DoorDash and Uber. That's using latitude and longitude, and there's no altitude dimension with that. And obviously, we don't live in a 2D world, we live in a 3D world. And so we're bringing the Z-axis or the altitude dimension to the market. And we're rolling that out throughout the United States. We cover 105 markets now, 4,400 cities. and about 90% of greater than 3-story buildings in the US. And the real use case of this was, much like how GPS exists on phones today, was, for 911 and public safety. That was the genesis of this. And if you can imagine calling 911 from a building and you can't tell them where you are in a 30-story building, it's going to take them a long time to find you. And ultimately, the FCC has put regulations to 911 using outdoor positioning, indoor positioning, and now vertical dimension. So when you call 911, they will know where you are. They will know how far off the ground you are, and be able to lead to better outcomes. And obviously, as we bring this service to the world, anybody who's using location data, everything from augmented reality and creating better experiences, better location-based games, leading to better customer service. If you're ordering something and you're going to go pick it up, well, how far am I away from you so that my fries aren't soggy when I go pick them up? Or if I'm delivering a pizza to you, how do I deliver it to the right location as fast as possible so I can create operational efficiencies? Basically, anything that uses location, we think is going to be enhanced with knowing the full 3D location data set.
Great. And if GPS got here in the 1990s, then what's taking so long to get this third dimension? The vertical dimension here. It's 2021 and it's just arriving. So can you explain why this is difficult, I guess?
Yeah, it's certainly not for the faint of heart. We've been working on this for about 13 years now. And a lot of it has to do with the technology needed to be there. And then there's, a big regulatory process for doing this. And the way that our technology works, it probably makes sense to kind of talk about that a little bit so people understand. As you move up, pressure goes down. This is not a novel concept. This is why as we go up in an elevator fast, our ears pop. You go up in an airplane, our ears pop. It's all pressure-based. And since about 2015, the majority of smartphones have included a barometric pressure sensor in them. Most wearables have pressure sensors in them, all leading up to kind of this new regulation that the FCC passed. So this has been years in the making. And knowing the latitude, longitude of a device, knowing the time of that device, where it was, when it was, then the pressure of that device, we can work with a network of altitude stations that we've deployed that are calculating all the localized air pressure throughout a metropolitan area. So if you think about public safety again, I don't care about just a building in Dallas where I am. I care about all the buildings in Dallas if I'm trying to lead to better outcomes for 911. So we had to deploy a network architecture of altitude stations that are calculating the barometric pressure in real time. And then based on that device, we can tell where that device was in terms of altitude within 3 meters of accuracy.
Cool. And then so now take us into games a little bit. Like what are you guys thinking about? Like why should game developers care about this kind of data, 3D data?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when we started this process of commercializing the service, which we rolled out our network from about 2 markets to covering 105 markets throughout 2020, we looked at who else would benefit from this. And obviously, anybody who's using location data can benefit from it. Game developers in particular are some of the early adopters of new technology. They just always have been. And so as we started thinking about it, we're like, all right, game developers would be great for this. Which are the largest game engines that are out there and how do they start benefiting from this as well? So we started to put, a lot of feelers out to game developers and to game engines to start incorporating this capability. And in 2020, we also built a Unity plugin to make it easier for game developers to bring this in. We think the games that are location-based, obviously coming out of COVID, we know that a lot of people are getting ready to get out back in the real world. And how do you start expanding the playground, if you will, in urban markets? And obviously a market like New York is very different than a market like Dallas, which is more suburban. And so how do we start taking advantage of all 3 dimensions in location-based oriented games? That was one of the areas of interest that we focused on. The other that's really adjacent to that is augmented reality. If you start thinking about game developers and augmented reality, they're 2 sides of a very similar coin. Obviously, we have the poster child, if you will, of that with Sarah at Niantic and on Pokemon. But if you think about where this is going, you start thinking about as a developer, how would I develop a game? How would I develop an experience if I knew where that person was with a level of precision. Are they in fact looking down? If they're on the second floor of a mall and looking down, what type of experience should they see? If they're looking up, what type of experience should they see if I know that they're on the first floor versus the third floor of a multi-story structure? What does that start looking like? And so that's why we focused on game developers and some of the game engines that were the bleeding edge of early adoption of new technology.
Cool. Very, very good explanations there. Let's bring Timothy in here and ask you, say, about, what's your reaction to some of the things that Dan has said and this new technology and how you think about it for games as well.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously the implications for games are pretty significant insofar as I think we're very used to having these large scale digital worlds that we can have fun in, that we can run around in. And I think Pokemon Go is a great example of really mixing the two, right? So now I have to admit, one time I was driving in my car playing Pokemon Go and had to pull over on the side of the road that's super dangerous. Don't do that. But, actively being in the world playing, oh my God, there's one around the corner, and obviously it was a huge hit. And people, I think, really crave that desire to have, the digital worlds that we love, the IP that we love, not just be something that we can't see or touch, but actually something that is part of our daily lives. And you can see this with theme parks, with LARPing, with conventions, all of these attempts for people to kind of live and breathe in these fantastical worlds we've created. So having that extra layer of data moves you from, I see this thing that could potentially be around me on the ground, to this can be in my room, and it can be in my room in a way that makes sense because I'm on the second floor of my house, right, as opposed to on the first floor. It adds that extra layer that is desperately needed in order to be able to take outside games inside as well. Right now, we just don't have that ability. We can sort of reason through an open space because we have the GPS coordinates, but we can't do anything with indoor information unless you have a very accurate mesh, and that is obviously technology that is up and coming, but also very expensive, time consuming to process, and is very accurely out of date. So this really just unlocks that next, I'm sure you make this joke all the time, but it unlocks that next level of accuracy in order to be able to bring those games back into the real world.
And Sarah, what is some of your own reaction to some of this so far, and how you see it being useful as well for games?
Absolutely, and I think it's just such an exciting space at the moment. We're in thinking about the combination of AR technologies and getting more and more accurate in terms of geolocation. I mean, historically, Niantic have focused on outdoor exploration, and so our own strategy has been more about sort of looking both at GPS and moving forward to VPS. But I think as we open up our technology through the Lightship program and so on, and we're allowing third-party developers and studios and partners to be using the technology, there's kind of endless possibilities of what you can be doing the more accurate you are in terms of location, in terms of the use cases, you name it. If you can dream it, it's becoming a possibility with the technology that's available. So it's a really exciting space.
Oh, very interesting. So I'm curious how you're going to make this 3D data available for game developers to make use of. Like, how does that work? I guess maybe I don't know if there's an explanation as well for just how they make use of 2D data as well. For Dan.
Yeah, so the way that we're making this available is through an SDK. To take some of the friction out, we created a Unity plugin for SDK just to take some of the friction out of the space. The easier that we can make it, the better it's going to be. But the SDK essentially handles a lot of the processing of what we do, make a lot easier for developers to have to, not worry about it. Obviously, location is a component of what they do. It's not all of it they do. So we wanted to take the burden off of that for developers. So we think the Unity plugin would be very easy for developers to start playing with and utilizing. And we're making that free available for developers to use in development and have 30 days access to our SDK via Unity today. And they can also come directly to us and work with our SDK, but we try and make it very easy for developers to use our technology.
And I guess for Timothy and for, go ahead and, I guess, is it easy? I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so we try to make it as easy as possible, and we've done this through a few different types of technology that I can all pipe in, all of this great location information, as well as things like spatial anchors and other types of sort of positioning information. But we created a new view in Unity. Right now there's two views. If you don't know Unity, you've got your scene view, which is where you put together your game, and then you have your game view, which is where you test your game. And that's where you can try out the gameplay. Does it work, debug, et cetera, before you actually put it on whatever device it's going to be on. We created a new view specifically for augmented and mixed reality, and it's called the simulation view. And the reason why we realized we needed this view is we don't just need you to be able to play test your game. We need you to be able to play test the space, what spaces you're in. So it actually allows you to sort of fake scanning a room, being in a space with your phone or with your HMD or whatever device that you have, and then actually be able to reason through, okay, so I'm in a living room and I have a coffee table, but the plane size is too small. So I need to, move this object over here. It can also, you can have vertical anchors, right? In this case, so you could take in the information and say, I want this to be 2 feet off the ground, find the ground plane, have an elevation condition attached to it. So it allows you to basically do what we have on the web already, and for mobile devices, which is, have flexible layout for whatever space you're going to have your app in. So in this case, you could use the data here, the location information, and be able to actually just lay out everything with these conditions in place, and then voila, you go to run your app and it should just work.
And one of the things that Timothy mentioned that is actually something I failed to mention is that it's very hard for people to understand, well, what does vertical dimension look like? We're all used to maps and we all see this every day. What does vertical actually look like? And so we created an altimeter as part of our SDK so that you can overlay this on a 2D map or 2.5D map as the technology gets better and 3D maps start coming into fruition. This will start providing better context. If you start thinking about a 2-story building, the vertical separation is fairly easy for people to understand. Well, imagine that over a 60 or 70-story building. All of a sudden, that floor separation becomes really small, even on a great high-res 4K screen. It's not going to look great. So we created this altimeter that gives the vertical separation that can be overlaid on a map, because visualizing this, I think, is really what starts to become magic for game developers in particular, and developers of all kinds.
And Sarah, anything you wanted to add there? Yeah.
No, just to sort of echo the point that I think it's great that there's becoming more accessibility, so that these technologies are getting into the hands of more people. The more developers, the more studios, the more people out there that are able to use these technologies, I think the more exciting and creative experiences we're gonna see coming out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Diana, I guess how do you think about things like privacy in this kind of 3D mapped world as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, I think it would be disingenuous to say that people should not be concerned with privacy. Location is obviously a sensitive subject depending on what it is, because you can correlate this with other data sets and identify who somebody is. So we don't collect any data, personal identifiable information at all. In fact, because we're doing this for public safety, you can imagine the way that our system actually separates data is very distinct, because we want to make sure we're not taking advantage of any data set. So this really gets down to the application layer of, does the app developer itself have permissions to use that data? And much like location services today on a device, it's not specifically saying GPS or Wi-Fi or using your accelerometer or your gyroscope. There's sensors in your device that you have access to, and you're either using it or you're not, and you're given the aspect from a consumer to opt into it or opt out of it, depending on different jurisdictions, different regulations, and certainly different operating systems now. Obviously, what you can do in the EU relative to GDPR is very different than what you can do in the US with CCPA or CPRA. And obviously what you can do on an Android device is different than an Apple device. And we just follow suit with that. So that's really up to the app developer. We don't capture any of that information. And if the app developer has permission to use that data, and they, obviously have to have compelling reasons now to get access to that information from a consumer. And if it's part of the app experience, consumers are probably more willing to opt into it. If it's a location-based game, let's say it's Pokemon Go, you need location to use Pokemon Go. And so that's a compelling reason to share your location. If you're using a weather application, probably a compelling reason to use location, or a delivery app. So it really gets down to the app functionality and the consumer experience that you're providing. And our service is just like GPS in that. It's basically just taking advantage of whatever consumer access that app has been granted.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if, Timothy or Sarah has anything to add on the privacy issue, but I was just going to sort of move on to how's this going to change games? And let's go to Sarah first for that one, if you'd like.
I think one of the things that's becoming really exciting is about, especially in the kind of augmented reality and the geospatial location piece, is that you can change your reality. So it's not just about sort of sitting at home in front of the TV playing games, but it's actually about being able to explore your neighborhood, explore local areas or new areas, and engage in a sort of immersive experience at the same time. So this kind of combination of exploration, but with the overlay, be it characters or sort of immersive spaces or experiences, art concepts, you name it. I think it's taking us into a really interesting direction, and gaming is evolving from something that was quite a sort of solo experience indoors to being an experience you can do with other people, would be multiplayer, it'd be outdoors. I really think the future is quite exciting in this space.
Mm-hmm. And Timothy, how about you? How's this going to change games?
I really think this is blurring the line between what is a game. Right now, obviously there's always open questions around is it a game if there's no score? Is it a game? Is it art? Is this a story? Is this an interactable movie? And I'm not really particularly, I think it's a game if you think it's a game. If the person who made it says it's a game, that's up to them. But I do think this is a very cool way of moving out of what we think of as traditional gameplay into, really, the closest thing we really do have is like a theme park or LARPing, right? Where it becomes part of your experience, and the point isn't the gameplay. The point is to be immersed, right? So there's immersive theater. There are really cool events that people have done, sort of where you're sort of play acting. Obviously, Sleep No More is a canonical example, but that wasn't particularly interactive, right? Now you go to Galaxy's Edge and you can play puzzles as you're standing in line for the Millennium Falcon, right? Smuggler's Run, right? And I think that is what we are going to see next. I think Pokemon Go is already a great example of you can play it casually throughout your day. I had coworkers who go out at lunch and catch some Pokemon and come back inside, and it was just sort of a routine that they had. And I see this as really unlocking that ability to move from I'm going to go over here and play a game to I'm going to take a pause, check my email, play the game, be in the world, and then come back to real life. So it's not casual gameplay. It's more like casual immersion, dipping back into that world that you love, that you just want to stay in touch with. That's where I see games going across the board.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Dan, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to echo what Timothy was saying, I think the use cases also expand. We're going from this kind of classic game playing, point scoring, battles, and so on, to thinking
type box.
Yeah, completely new immersive spaces. I was talking about a use case recently, sort of for people who maybe have suffered from PTSD, and so that they can create a safe space, if they're having a panic attack or something, and you can use your phone to do a mesh space around you to kind of put you back in a safe space. And there's so many use cases, I think, coming forward.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's, gaming specifically is one thing. I think it's the gamification. It's kind of this intersection of digital and physical worlds, and how people are leveraging the technology to enhance and augment kind of their world around them. And so I think the gamification, and Burger King just ran a campaign with augmented reality, for getting kids back into into restaurants. And you start thinking about certainly COVID was such a dramatic shift to how we think about places and spaces. And as the world comes back open, well, how do we reimagine some of those spaces using this, this great influx of 100 million more gamers coming on to the gaming industry last year? Well, they're not going to stop playing games, and they're not going to stop, using technology as they go back in the world. And what does that world start looking like? And with 84% of the US anyway living in urban markets, and obviously about 50% of the globe living in urban markets, taking advantage of the full 3D that we live in, I think is going to be paramount. And this intersection of digital and physical, I think we're going to see tremendous transformations, and it's here now. And just excited to see what developers are going to be building with it.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, I know that Niantic bought a company where you use your camera to sort of point it around, and you can actually start absorbing the 3D space around you, and have it sort of be the basis for renderings, and then for artwork. You could put graffiti on things, I guess, right? I think that's interesting technology, and I wonder, Dan, is that something that goes hand in hand with this 3D geolocation technology as well, or the combination of these different kinds of data? I guess sounds like they could be important for a variety of things, like mapping, for example, is one. Like 3D mapping for sure, but also just other kinds of uses as well. So that combination sounds like it's going to be interesting, but it also means that we might have to do that for the whole world.
No, absolutely. No, and I think the combination is the right way to think about it, is that, there's an aspect that you're going to get through a camera lens, right? And, obviously there's a number of different companies that are in different stages of rolling out, eyewear type of solutions with AR type of hardware devices. Obviously, what's happening with 5G and edge computing and the latency aspect being solved is going to greatly change how people view the world. And the metadata, if you will, that makes it all run is going to be better location awareness of where people are, not just what they visually see, but the expectation that they're going to want the game, the app, the experience to know about what that world looks like, not just what they see, because we're already experiencing it, right? When we've all experienced opening up, a ride hailing app, and you're like, why does it not know that I'm standing at this corner? The expectations are greatly increasing because we see it in our everyday lives, and that bar just keeps getting raised. And people want friction taken out of it. They want better understanding of where they are and better experiences delivered to them. And I think that a camera capacity coupled with better data is going to make that experience, the Uber effect, if you will, of any game or any type of application.
And Sarah, maybe this seems like a good point for you also to talk about Lightship, I guess, and the AR technology there. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just been launched, so it's fortuitous timing. It's essentially we've been keen to open up our technology to third parties. Historically, Niantic have published our own games, and that obviously limits the bandwidth and the number of projects we can work on. And so by opening up access to our ARDK and the developer kit, titled the Lightship program, it means that we can have more use cases. It can be sort of more novel experiences, and there doesn't need to be the kind of same scope, as it were. So someone could be doing a sort of a really standalone niche example, the one I gave about, I was speaking to a pharmaceutical company actually who were interested in doing these kind of safe spaces for people who suffered from panic attacks or PTSD, through to thinking about conservation projects and how you can be educating people on how we can be taking greater steps toward climate change, for example, through to kind of completely new cases about how you can do sports, and there can be some hardware that syncs with an application, so you can learn dance with your app and it will give you points if you get the steps right, and so on. There's just sort of such a world of creativity, And we're really excited that we're enabling more people to use that technology. So we're going to see more use cases, and it's more accessible and in the hands of the people who can make it happen.
Cool. Let's see. I've got some audience questions here. I've got some of my own as well. Does anybody want to take us in a particular direction at this point? Mention anything before I get started on some of that? But,
well, yeah. I mean, if I can, I mean, part of this is that this, the world is greatly changing, right? And this is, again, we kind of touched on it. The games is an important driver of it. But when you start thinking about what the expectations of consumers are going to have, and digital twins, and if I can understand a digital representation of the physical world, well, I'm going to expect that to be as close of an approximation to everything in the physical world as possible. Well, the only way I have that is with better data. People are going to expect flawless executions if this adoption curve continues. And that is going to require and necessitate new infrastructure, new technology. We're glad to be part of it. You mentioned kind of the global aspect of better mapping. And, this is an underlying core capability of context to the physical world that we live in. And a digital representation of that is going to be required and is going to need the best data to make that digital world the best that it can be, because that's just what consumers are going to be expecting. They're going to be expecting, okay, if I'm sharing my location of a coffee application, for instance, and that I'm stuck in traffic, well, don't have my latte sitting there for 10 minutes and getting cold. That's just going to be an expectation. And they're going to say, well, it's cold, remake it. Well, why do I want to remake it if I can use that technology and that data to provide better experiences? If, again, we talked about the fry example, but if you're going to pick up shoes, well, where am I so that you can bring them to me so I don't waste my time? People's expectations of saving time, better experiences, has been greatly increased from, COVID. And those types of experiences are going to need to continue, and be accelerated, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And Timothy, I guess digital twins must get you excited as well.
yeah, very much on our radar. Yeah, exactly. And I would just add to that. Yes, the use cases are vast outside of games. Games came first. Games are world creations. They're their own little self-contained systems, right? And that makes game engines so great for simulating the real world as well, and being able to take in information from the real world and be interactive about it. One thing that we haven't touched on yet that I think is interesting too, it's not just about mapping the space and the position of people in space. It's about the objects. It's about other types of sensor information. So being able to tag and track, everything from a machine to a pet to a person. We can track people now with GPS, not particularly precisely, not enough to be able to do so much with it, but we can do that now. But just in the future, there are some privacy concerns around, for example, room scanning. But the reality is, it is so extraordinarily convenient to be able to understand, have your computer have true world awareness and understanding. That I think people will take that privacy hit in the same way we did with GPS, right? When I first started, I was working at Foursquare when GPS was turned on by default on phones, and we did a whole ton of work trying to allay people's concerns that their phone would be checking them constantly. Fast forward to 2021, and you don't think about it any more than I do any day. So this is just, I think, a new era of computer contextual literacy that does require it to have more information.
And Sarah, I guess for realism too, in location-based games, it certainly seems like you guys are really trying to make things that are overlaid on the real world look like they're in the real world, right? I mean, that's the goal, I think, that you guys want to get to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're sort of busy mapping the world as quickly as we can. And I think there's some really great use cases about people exploring their local areas through the games and through the experiences. One of the partners I was speaking to in London said he started playing Pokemon Go and thought that there was just a lamppost down his street. And it was through the game that he discovered it was actually a Victorian stink pipe. And so he started a whole ream of research into kind of Victorian engineering in the city. And so I think it's a really great way to explore and see what your local environment has to offer. And some of the use cases I'm talking about with things like museums or, as I say, climate change, is a real way of kind of gamifying education and engagement. So it's not just reading a book or going physically to a museum, but there's some interesting ways you can learn but feel immersed in that learning process.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. Go over to some audience questions here. Like one is about, I guess, more about like what comes first, like what kinds of applications will we see first? And, the question here is like, what's the official introduction date in the US for E911 to include 3D data? And, when will this kind of service basically turn on so that the emergency services people can actually make use of it?
Yeah. So start with the first part. So, you're going to see this, games obviously is an area that is strong interest, but where you're going to see this probably first, and we've actually announced some of these partners, Gimbal being one of those partners around consumer experience. Again, if you start thinking about picking up things or having things delivered, understanding where somebody is, how far away, ensuring that they're, delighting the customer with great experiences. Again, who wants soggy fries? Who wants a cold, coffee? Those are just me expectations. And if you're a brand doing that, why do you want to, have operational inefficiency? So can I use this to get better understanding of my capacity, my consumer experience, so that I don't have a bad experience? I think those are going to be some of the, early adopters of some of this technology outside of games. In terms of 911 specifically, the FCC regulation went into effect in April. So that is the current regulation of the FCC. And each one of the wireless carriers has positioned the FCC for individual waivers. And the FCC is weighing each one of those. So the FCC will be the one to answer that question. But suffice to say, much like GPS, it is coming, and it'll be soon from a 911 perspective. We already have some first responders that are using this. So you can imagine, a fire team. Most of the calls that a fire squad or EMS go out to is to save people, or a police force that is going in to clear a building. You can imagine a SWAT team of, do I shoot Timothy or not because she's a friend or a foe? Those are really important things to understand. Situational awareness is very important. So you're starting to see that in some first responder applications. AT&T, one of our partners, has already announced the first responder app, Intrepid Response, already includes this. So you'll start seeing a slew of different announcements relative to the public safety and the first responder ecosystem as well that we're very proud of.
There's another question here about that. Do you have to install your own hardware in the building to determine the height / the dimension? Yep. And I guess by extension, I'd wonder if, like, for New York City, would you have to have sensors on every block or something like that to make this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, there's different technology that can provide different types of capabilities, and you can install, Bluetooth beacons, for instance, if you wanted to cover an entire building with beacons that would be highly accurate, but not scalable. So if you're doing this for public safety reasons, you don't care about a building. So there is no building infrastructure required for this. It's network infrastructure. And we deploy, very similar to how you would roll out or how a carrier network would roll out, essentially. We cover a geographic area with our altitude stations. And that, because it's not radiating, we don't need to necessarily worry about signal capacity. So it's basically just localized weather events, and that's part of the network planning that we have. So areas that have microclimates, or you can imagine extreme topography changes like San Francisco, require greater density of our altitude stations, and sprawling areas like Dallas, for instance, less so, but there's no localized building environment requirement.
Okay. And let's see. What service do you provide besides what already exists on Android and iOS, i.e. the altitude property via GPS API?
Well, we provide, the Z access. So GPS, again, provides, or most location services, I won't say just GPS, because some of it is other services as well, provides latitude, longitude. It's not a useful altitude dimension. While Android does provide a altitude dimension, it's not useful because it's crowdsourced Wi-Fi. And so understanding, if you think about like a Wi-Fi, think about our own use case, your Wi-Fi radius is somewhere between 10 and 20 meters, generally speaking. So think about a shopping mall. It's probably good enough to say you're in, this shop or the shop next to it. But flip that on its edge, and that's, somewhere between 4 and 6 floors of ambiguity. Really not useful in terms of understanding where you are. And so we provide that altitude dimension as a service, and we're providing just the raw coordinates. And then soon we'll be providing the estimated floor number. You can imagine that's a larger challenge. There isn't a universal database of how high every floor is in the United States or in the world. I don't know if it's a single-story lobby or a two-story lobby. Does it have a number 13 floor? Does it not have a number 13 floor? But the altitude dimension, the height above the terrain or the ground level, is the service that we'll provide, and then longer term, a estimated floor number.
Here's another techie-oriented one. They wonder if 3 meters precision is granular enough for game usage. I guess is that going to be good enough to run games on?
Are you asking me that?
I guess the first question would be like, is that the actual precision level?
Yeah. So the FCC mandate is 3 meters of accuracy 80% of the time. And as you can imagine, because this is done for public safety reasons, the amount of testing was very large, and it wasn't done by us. It was done by independent third party who had to publish the results for the FCC. So it was measured in 155,000 simulated 911 calls, and we were measured at 3 meters of accuracy 94% of the time. So 94% of the time, we're within, essentially 1 floor in the United States. Most of the time, we're going to be under 1.8 meters, which is, about 3 feet or so, 3.5 feet. So it's going to be accurate enough to know where somebody is. There's certainly more precise things, but that's going to require, again, putting actual infrastructure in every single building. So would it be good enough for a robotic forklift to understand exactly which bin they were pulling from a smart warehouse? Probably not. Is it good enough to know, is there somebody standing in front of it so that I don't run them over? Yeah. So think about it more for understanding where people are versus, an object that, you might need to know centimeters of accuracy. That's, a larger challenge, obviously.
I have a response to that as well, which is it totally depends on the game. So that's a very unanswerable question until we talk about what the gameplay is. And second, it has another use case that we maybe you touched on, and if so, I apologize, but let me just reiterate it. A lot of existing technology around like image markers or any sort of relocalization, like reorienting the device space in the world so you feel like you're back in the space and all of your digital objects where you left them, it's pretty limited, right? So this tech is also kind of a nice, good starting filter. You have your geolocation filter, and then you have this filter, and then within that, you're like, okay, I know where I am. I know what the corresponding either meshes or the corresponding image marker, whatever it is you're using, whatever tech you're using to kind of recalibrate that final within 3 meters precision. So this, I think, as I think of this as part of that larger tool set of we're here in the universe, we're here on Earth, we're here on the second floor, and now we're here sitting in front of this one particular image.
And that, I guess, at some point, your camera basically becomes the tool that takes over to figure out exactly where you want to place an animated character or something, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And that's interesting. We started getting in a bit into AR and the Matrix, I guess, but I do wonder, how essential you see this for something like the metaverse, I guess. It's pretty broad question here. Anybody want to tackle that?
Insofar as the metaverse is an extension of sort of the networked 2D internet that we already have, I would consider it very essential. What else do we consider the metaverse but that extension out into the third dimension? Otherwise, we could just argue that the metaverse is already here.
And especially if, I guess, you're talking about a metaverse you can access while you're moving around, right? It's not one where you're sitting at a computer desk or wearing, VR goggles, I guess, in a contained space, right? So,
or all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's another question here. Maybe I don't know, Sarah, if you guys already have one of these, but what do you think an ideal laboratory looks like to build, play, and test vertical location technology?
I think that's something that we're trying to work out ourselves at the moment. I guess it's about having the option to be kind of as creative as you want, and having sort of taken the pressure off in terms of timescales and in terms of deliverables. And we're almost trying to create that for people with our Lightship project. We're trying to get that technology in the hands of people so that they can go and explore and ideate and sort of come up with new and novel experiences. So I'm not sure, really. I'm not a technical person.
Might have to have a skyscraper.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's really about having a multi-story structure. I mean, even for my own use case, I was trying to understand, okay, what does this actually do? And so we actually have a test application, and I loaded it on my phone, and I started walking up the floors of our condo building and started to see the actual dimension change. And then you can start saying, okay, well, how would I actually use this in a consumer application or a game? And so I think obviously a multi-story environment would be useful if you're going to test, the third dimension, if you will. But just like you're going to test any type of location service or any type of data service, you want a varied, experiences. You want to be able to test things outdoors. You want to be able to test things indoors. You want to be able to test things underground. You want to be able to test whatever environment that you're looking to ensure that your app or your experience represents. So all of it. I mean, you want to be able to test in many different types of environments, because obviously we as people are itching to get back out, and we're going to be in lots of different places. And so you want to, I would use the world as your testing ground.
Mm-hmm. What are you going to do about that problem of nobody wants to be on the 13th floor?
Well, it's a problem in the U.S. There is a 13th floor. It just might not be numbered 13.
Yeah, interesting. For our audience, if you want to ask more questions, we do have some more time here to keep going. I've got a few in the queue here, but we could probably use some more questions from the audience. So. Let's see. I think one interesting one here that could use a lot of sort of advice from Dan is like, what advice do you have for customers starting off on this journey, and what should they be thinking about, and how should they approach it?
Just try. I mean, it's like anything else. It's new technology, so start using it. Much like Pokemon Go. Again, I hate, Sarah, we keep going back to you on this, but that was a phenomenon because people just started trying it. This is a new technology, so put it in people's hands and just start experimenting. If you're using location data as part of your app, as part of your experience, as part of your, delivery mechanism, whatever it is, just start using the third dimension and start playing with the data. And if that is making that experience better, do more of it. If it's not, don't. I'm not going to say it's going to enhance everybody, but much like, we kind of talked about this earlier, we didn't think that people would use GPS services for ordering car services or food or dating or games, and yet everybody has. So it's just, don't be afraid to try it and go play with it. That's the best, advice I can give. Mm-hmm. And we tried to make it as frictionless as possible. It's an easy SDK. Obviously, with Unity, we built a plugin for developers to go try it and just go start experimenting with it.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, I guess, are you guys just proceeding down this road, and are you using or waiting for other technologies as well to come along to help with what you guys want to do?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the wonderful position that technology is kind of evolving as we go. So you kind of blink and there's some new innovation and technology. One of the things we're really excited about as well is the VPS. So when that's going to be coming in. That's kind of another layer to help in terms of the accuracy and in terms of what is possible.
Mm-hmm. There's one audience question for Dan, I guess. What are your plans outside the U.S. as well?
Great question. So we actually have already publicly announced a joint venture that we have in Japan to bring this service with Metcom. And this is, we have two different technologies, and this technology doesn't require any spectrum. And so for us to deploy this service anywhere around the world now can be done. So we're being opportunistic at this point in time of which markets we go into, but there's a number of global considerations that we have in terms of where we're going to bring in this. You can imagine, any market that is vertical, dense, and urban is an opportunity for NextNav's Pinnacle service, and we're exploring a number of different opportunities, and we have some announcements that will be forthcoming of different markets that we're going into. Mm-hmm. So stay tuned.
Here's another one that's interesting, I guess. Where do you see the web in relation to serving these geospatial experiences versus apps?
Is that for me or
anybody can tackle that one if they have a thought, I guess. But,
well, I mean, I think there's an aspect of the service itself. I mean, there's nothing inherent that a web service versus an app service is going to do. I think a lot of it gets down to the permissions. When you're doing a web service, you're having to ask for permissions each time versus an app, which is kind of done, set it and forget it. So it really gets down to kind of the use case of that, and then where's the heavy lifting essentially being done. We are offering the service today through apps, and it's an SDK, but with the API coming out next month, it can be invoked in web services very easily. And so I think it's more about where's the tech residing, and what type of permissions do you have to be granted each time that you're invoking a service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that too, regardless of whether it looks like the web or what it looks like in an app, we are going to rethink how apps are today. This having one standalone discrete application running at a time doesn't make sense in a spatial operating system. You want to, the same way I now have, Chrome open, and I have Day One open, and I have, operating systems are designed to have multiple apps open at the same time. This is the way we use computers. Due to their form, we've gotten very used to having one app open at a time on mobile phones. And that language is kind of extended a bit to tablets. But the reality is not only when I'm in my headset, do I want to be able to have multiple apps open and work together sensibly in a way that makes sense. But I also want them to work across devices. I want to be able to be wearing my AR glasses and pull something out of my computer and pin it in space, right? So we're not just talking about interoperability between the apps. We're talking about extreme interoperability, headsets as a peripheral for, even then your computer is on some level of peripheral, because it would have to have hand tracking to know that you're trying to pull something out of it. So the metaphor we end up using is much less about any discrete device and much more about my computer is a bunch of distributed devices that are all around me that are all highly interoperable. So that's the way we see it going.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how this might change, map apps as well, and what would you expect for them to do? I remember, I guess you could do the 3D view, sort of animated 3D views of maps. But maybe you would switch between sort of a 2D and a 3D view if you're looking for a location, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think we talked about this before, but I put an air tag on my puppy, so if he's around, I can know where he is, right? And now and if my boyfriend and I share locations on Google Maps, every time I open it up, I can see where he is, and it's his face on the map right now. If I open Find My, the app Find My, I can see where my puppy is. So that's not just a map showing location. That's a map that's highly personal. That's showing me where my loved ones are hiding. In the case of the puppy.
I was just going to ask that. I think there's a really exciting kind of travel opportunities about we use a lot of Wayfinder type apps, but it would be so exciting for that to be gamified or it to be a more of an immersive experience. So it was useful in terms of leading from A to B, but there's some extra elements so that it's not just a functional thing, but it's actually an enjoyable experience too.
Yeah, well, we've all experienced being in a mall and you go to that directory to find where the store is you're looking for. You're like, okay, where am I and where is that store in relation to me? So yeah, maps are changing. They're all moving to 3D maps, and obviously a 3D data element is going to make that map come to life. Where's the blue dot, if you will, and a more accurate 3D representation. And I think the types of devices, the hardware devices that starts to be overlaid on, I think is really going to be the critical thing that starts to unlock some of that value. Again, if you're walking through a mall and you're on the first floor and you need to navigate to the fourth floor, for instance, if you're in a Westfield Mall in San Francisco that's 4 stories, well, you don't want to be looking at every single floor. Maybe the stores might want you to, but if your time is precious, you want to navigate there as quickly as possible. So I think the form factor that's going to be making some of this come to life is coming, but it's going to require better mapping and better data, and those two things coming together in engines that can help render it. And I think Unity, made an announcement with Here Technologies around something just like that. I think Unreal did something with Cesium very similarly. I mean, this is the way this world is moving, and 3D capabilities are unlocking it all.
So I think we're getting close to our last question here, or questions maybe. Here's one that's, I guess, familiar in some ways. How do you see this being used by developers, as far as whether the big developers or smaller ones, and how do you democratize this technology?
Look, it's easy. At the end of the day, whether you're a big developer or a small developer, do you use location, and do you want to enhance that location? And as Timothy mentioned, I mean, it all depends on what that experience is. But the one thing that we know is that consumers are going to be more critical of what the form function is of that application. They're going to be very sensitive to their time from an experience perspective. They're going to want more out of their games as they, start going into different type of experiences. And, whether it's a big developer or a small developer, just get in there and start using it. The tools are there, and the platforms have made it easy to integrate different things. They want to make sure that, if you're using a Unity plugin, it's not going to make your app crash because you developed it on Unity. So, the tools are there, and I think that they've made them very easy to integrate different solution sets and different assets and just start taking advantage of it.
Another one is, do you see any seed stage companies coming up around this technology, outside of NextNav, right? So, yeah.
Look, I mean, I think there's lots of different technologies that are trying to solve, and provide better data, at the end of the day, and better accuracy from location services. Building infrastructure is not for the faint of heart. This is the only way that we could solve it. A lot of other companies have tried to solve it and couldn't without infrastructure, and not a lot of companies want to do a lot of infrastructure. This is 12 years in the making. We're 13 years old, a lot of IP around it and infrastructure. So, that's the way I'd answer that.
Okay. Well, any last words from anyone as well? Anything, other points you guys wanted to make here?
I mean, I can. I mean, look, at the end of the day, games and experiences and apps and digital twins and infrastructure and, industrial use cases, the possibilities are limitless. Location is something that we inherently use in our everyday life. Most things are running somewhere off of location. Again, we never thought dating apps would be, we'd be dating from apps that use your location, or that, pictures would be geotagged for understanding where that was in the real world. Location is endemic to so many different things, and we do not live in a 2D world. We live in a 3D world. And, again, there's more use for it, and it comes out loud and clear in markets like a San Francisco or a Tokyo that are obviously very dense, very vertically. But, this works in shopping malls and in airports. There's so many different places that we live and go to on a regular basis. And we were talking about sports earlier. I mean, think about stadiums. Those are, 8, 9, 10-story structures overall, and understanding kind of that experience in there. So the possibilities are really limitless when you start thinking about how would you take advantage of a 3D world.
Exactly. Yeah, Nate, really nicely put. I'm very excited. This is a tech that is new now, but will become ubiquitous. So we're just laying down the groundwork for the next wave of computing. Very exciting stuff.
Thank you, everybody. And I guess I would turn it back over to Dave, our host. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean, and a big thanks to all of our speakers today for their insights into today's topic. Timothy West, Sarah Burslem, Dan Haidt, and our moderator, Dean Takahashi. Of course, thanks to NextNav as well for making today's event possible. A few final notes before we let you go. Today's webinar was recorded, and you can access that recording in about 30 minutes right here on this page. So if you missed anything or if you'd like to view it again, you'll be able to do that in about a half of an hour. Before you leave us today, if you could, please use the rating system on your screen to let us know what you thought. You can rate this webinar on a 5-star scale. You can also provide us with comments and other feedback. We'd love to see that. Please do. And finally, a reminder that today's webinar is copyright 2021 by VentureBeat. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by VentureBeat, which is responsible for their content. And the individual speakers, of course, are solely responsible for their own content and their own opinions. Thanks so much for being with us today. That does conclude today's VB Live event. We will see you next time. Have a great day.